we are introducing today in the Senate, and I really want to thank Congresswoman Pingree in the House for her leadership on the Food Date Labeling Act. This measure is really about common sense, standard labeling. Right now, consumers are confronted with a dizzying array of different labels depending on where they live, what they're shopping to buy, where they shop, a patchwork of piecemeal, often conflicting standards. A lot of consumers, and I'm one of them, have believed for years and years that the date on the product is a measure of safety, that people cannot eat the food after a certain date, when in fact, most manufacturers indicate simply food quality, peak quality. And what our legislation would do is to distinguish between those two factors and save money, save costs to manufacturers and retailers, save a lot of expense for families, and save food and potentially save lives, because food could be donated even after the date indicated if it is accurate. And the problem is right now the date is irrelevant to food safety. Americans toss away 10 cents of every dollar of food they buy unnecessarily. In many instances, there's a waste of about $165 billion every year in food as a result of this confusion. The problem is that right now there is mass consumer confusion. A lot of waste, a lot of money and food simply wasted, and the remedy is to have a standard national means of distinguishing between peak quality and safety. So we would indicate on the food labeling two separate kinds of labels. One, expires on, which would mean the food should not be eaten after that date. That's a matter of safety. The other would be best if used by, which indicates better to eat it before that date than afterward, but not necessary to throw it away after that date. And anybody who didn't want to eat it after peak quality could then donate it, could make it available to people who are food insecure. This kind of standard will save money, costs of compliance, and potentially save lives by making food available to people right now who need it and don't have it. So I am hopeful that we will have strong support throughout the food industry, certainly among consumer groups, and from the public at large, because a lot of people are taking food out of their refrigerator, looking at the sell-by date, thinking it means unsafe to eat if that date has passed, and throwing it away unnecessarily. And we can help to save that money, save lives, save food, if we simply have proper informative labeling. So with that, I'm very honored to turn it over to United States Representative Chellie Pingree, who has been a leader, perhaps the leader in the United States Congress on food issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you to everybody here today, and certainly thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for being willing to do this. It's great to have this introduced on both the House and the Senate, and you got a little bit of a summary of what we're doing here today and just a few other points. We kind of came to this because we've been learning a lot about food waste and the fact that 40% of the food in this country is wasted, and we have 50 million people struggling with hunger. So as the senator said, we could feed a lot more people if we weren't throwing so much of our food away or losing it in a variety of ways. This is also one of those great, easy to understand issues, because I think almost everybody has had a domestic argument about this, and Congress doesn't usually settle that many domestic arguments, but almost everyone has had a fight at home where somebody says, we should throw this away, and the other person says, no, I think it's perfectly good. So we thought about calling it the Domestic Harmony Act of 2016, but we're just going to go ahead with the food labeling thing. But you've got a sense about it. I've also introduced another bill called the Food Recovery Act, which has about 20 proposals from farm to consumer. But this one is so specific and so easy to understand that we thought this was good to go about working on right away. There's also a really wonderful report from an organization called ReFed, looking at dozens of ways, or about a dozen ways, to reduce food waste. And they decided that food labeling was the single most cost-effective thing that we could do. So this is a great idea. It will save money and it will save waste. And as you heard, what we're really just trying to do is to get some consistency in the state labeling. People see all these different labels, best if used by, sell by, all these other things, and they don't know what it means. And we're just looking for those two possible labels that says expires on, if it's food you really have to worry about, or best if used by. And another important part about this is about 20 states restrict sale or donation of these post-date foods. So you've got states that are restricting it, yet there's no necessarily scientific or safety-based evidence around what the date means. So again, we're throwing away food, we're making it difficult liability issues for entities that want to donate this food, individuals are confused about it, and there's no really good reason for not fixing some of these problems. You'll see it all the time if you go into a grocery store, and one of our favorite examples, and I'll just end with that, is honey. You pick up a jar of honey, and it will probably have an expiration date, yet archaeologists have found honey in sites that's over 1,000 years old and is still perfectly good to eat. So I'm not recommending you go dig up some honey in an archaeological site, but the fact is, this is an issue that will be easy to solve, and I hope we have a lot of broad-based support. And we're thrilled to have some people here from the industry today, environmental groups, people who are concerned about feeding America. And I'm going to turn things over to Emily Broadleib, who's the director of the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic that's really been doing some wonderful work around these issues, and we're thrilled to have her here with us today.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here today. We're very, very supportive of this legislation and really grateful to Representative Pingree and Senator Blumenthal for taking the leadership on this. As you've already heard, we have a huge issue of food waste in this country. We waste about 40% of the food we produce, and we spend $218 billion on preparing, shipping, storing, getting to market food that we then throw away. So it's not only an issue for households and consumers, it's also a huge issue for the environment in terms of the resources wasted on that. For all of these reasons, we've been working in my program, the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard, for the past 4 years really, on this issue of date labels and the role that they play in confusing consumers and leading to harm to the environment. So we've sort of found two major things. One, which you just heard a bit about from Representative Pingree, is that states are confused and have a dizzying array of state laws that don't make that much sense. In a 2013 report that we released with the Natural Resources Defense Council, we looked over the federal law. We kind of found, as you can tell from this legislation, there really isn't federal guidance on this. And so instead, there are 41 states that require dates on at least some food product, 20 states that restrict sale or donation after that date. And they vary from New York, which has no rules on this, to Massachusetts, which requires dates on a large variety of foods and makes it very difficult to sell food after that date. So that's one issue. The other major issue is that consumers are very, very confused about this. You've heard in households people fighting about it. I grew up in such a household. And we actually last month conducted a national survey with the National Consumer League and Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, in which we looked at what do consumers really think these mean. And we found that right now a third of consumers say that they always throw food away after the date, and 84% of people occasionally do. We also found that a third of people think that these dates are federally regulated, which means that people really think that someone is behind those dates and is giving them clear and important information. So this legislation makes a lot of sense because it can help to really match the reality with what people think they're getting. It can standardize food so people know when there's really only a quality reason for the date, and then they can make their own decisions based on taste and smell, on, I might think something tastes stale, but you don't, and that's okay. We'll also make consumers safer by making it more clear to them that small handful of foods that really there is a safety risk, which we haven't been communicating well. So this is really a common sense legislation that can really help households, help people's wallets, help the economy, and help the environment. So I'm thrilled to be supportive of this legislation.
Thank
Thanks.
you. And we're going to hear from now Steve Armstrong, who is the Chief Food Law Counsel for the Campbell Soup Company, which stepped forward very early to take the initiative on this issue. Steve.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank the Senator and Representative Pingree for your leadership on this issue. This bill is a really welcome development for the food industry. Campbell supports this bill. It's really much needed. There's nothing we like to do more than to donate food that we can no longer sell or doesn't have a rightful place in the marketplace consistent with our plans. But it is not an easy thing to do. We know that food that passes its code date is frequently thrown out, and there's just no good reason for this. Many of the foods that you see on supermarket shelves, including many of our brands, soups, sauces, shelf-stable beverages, juices, V8, are safe and nutritious long past their sell-by dates. From our perspective, throwing away food is not just a waste, it's a terrible shame. And this bill is going to help in three very important ways. First, it's going to create a consistent and understandable format for code dating. Hallelujah. Consumers are finally going to understand what code dates are and what they are not. The Senator and the Congresswoman and their staffs have drafted just an excellent bill that puts a lot of the responsibility for sorting all this out in the hands of the FDA and the USDA, and helpfully directs them to work together nicely. It's going to help educate consumers and help them understand what the difference between a quality date and a safety date, and promote understanding. For us in the industry, it's going to create a safe harbor for donation by making clear that no one is going to prohibit a donation of nutritious, safe food just because it's past its expiration date. This bill is going to create a level playing field where everybody in the industry will know the rules and will play by them. It's a very welcome development, and I want to thank you both. Campbell is firmly behind the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now representing Nestle, another leader in this area, Paul Backus, President of Corporate Affairs.
Well, thank you. It's awesome to be a part of this event and really this movement. And I love the common sense nature of this legislation. I really appreciate the leadership the two of you are showing. It's kind of no-duh legislation, right? It's really an opportunity for everyone to come together to really drive food waste down. And Nestle is the largest food and beverage company in the world, but we have a pretty big presence in the United States. We're 51,000 employees. We operate in 47 states with 89 factories. And we are committed to being a part of the solution. We really do support this effort. And let me give you a couple of examples of what we're doing in this area of food waste and then how it links to this legislation. The first is we're committed to going zero waste to landfill in our factories, almost 500 factories around the globe by 2020. And reducing our waste in our operations is a huge part of that commitment. And we've reduced our waste by 41% per ton since 2010. We still have a long way to go, though, to go to zero waste to landfill. But we're also looking for creative ways to eliminate the waste or do something different with the waste. And so I'll give you an example of a factory in Freehold, New Jersey, which makes coffee. We use the spent coffee grounds, send it to a company that creates logs for domestic fireplaces. So it's just another creative way to drive waste down or reuse waste and create energy in this case. The other example I'll use is Feeding America. So Feeding America has been a partner with Nestle for quite some time, and we've donated over 110 million pounds of food over the last 6 years. And we're really looking forward to this legislation enabling us to contribute even higher levels of food to this very important cause. And so we're really excited about what this day means, and we hope that this becomes a bigger movement for not only us in the food industry, but in the whole supply chain, because together, getting collective action on this issue is really going to enable us to really not only reduce waste, but turn this food into food for folks for a better cause. So really appreciate the efforts here, and really glad to be a part of it. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And now Carrie Calvert, Director of Tax and Commodity Policy for Feeding America.
Thank you. Well, like everyone before me, I really do want to commend Senator Blumenthal and Representative Pingree for taking this important step. I like to say that Feeding America and our donor partners have been, working on food waste before it was cool. We were established actually 35 years ago as a way to help coordinate the donation of safe access food to food banks. But really, we've seen that as things have changed, federal law in some instances has not kept up. The 46 million people we're serving, they're consumers as well, and they're confused. They're confused at the grocery store. They're confused by the dates on food they're getting donated. So there's a real need for clear information across the spectrum, both with, at the retail level, manufacturing level, and at the consumer level. The other issue is 20 states have laws that don't allow donation past date, for no scientific reason. So we're really looking forward to having a clear standard established by the FDA and USDA so that people can know that food is safe to eat and what dates really mean. So thank you, and we look forward to working with you to get this legislation passed.
Thanks a lot. And Pete Pearson, Director of Food Waste, World Wildlife Fund.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
I also wanted to echo just the leadership, Representative Pingree and Senator Blumenthal. I'm here to talk about the broader implications, which many probably don't think about, and it's wildlife. What's the wildlife guy doing up here, right? But it's really simple. Everything we eat has an impact on the planet. And according to the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity, it's food production, it's agriculture that has caused the most dramatic loss of biodiversity on Earth. And it's in this context that the World Wildlife Fund works on this issue. Food production has one of the largest environmental footprints of any human activity. And the alarming thing is that continues to expand. We're expanding agriculture, not just globally, even in our own country. From deforestation to habitat conversion to overfishing, it threatens the most biodiverse regions on Earth. And one of them is the Northern Great Plains. This is here in the US. It's one of only 4 of the last remaining temperate grasslands left in the world, and we lose about 1 million acres of agriculture every year to agriculture. An effective food strategy must address the issue of waste, and that's why this bill is so valuable. Preventing waste becomes one of the most impactful acts of conservation you can engage in. And so this act really does a lot by heightening awareness on what we shouldn't be wasting, helps us navigate confusing date labels, and it will help us all reduce waste and save more money. So again, I echo and thank both Representative Pingree and Senator Blumenthal for this.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And lastly, Eric Olson, who is Director of the Health and Environmental Program for the Natural Resource Defense Council.
Well, good morning, and I will also echo thanks to Representative Pingree and Senator Blumenthal for leadership on this. And the interesting thing is that we're really starting to see bipartisan interest and support for doing something about this issue. So we're thrilled about that. And as you've heard, contrary to popular belief, just because there's a date on a food label, that does not mean that there's any relationship to food safety. And unfortunately, because consumers have been so confused about this issue, we're seeing folks tossing massive amounts of food. And one of the things that people often don't think about is what's embedded in that food that they're throwing away. For example, it's about 25% of freshwater consumption in the U.S. The equivalent of that is being tossed into the trash because of food waste. In addition, the equivalent of 33 million cars driving on the road, the greenhouse gases from that, are simply being tossed into landfills. That's a lot of waste. There's a huge environmental impact to that we really need to address. In our view, what we really need to do and what this legislation would do is put more food on plates and less food in the landfills. That's what we've got to do. So basically what we are urging is that ultimately we address the confusion of consumers. You've heard that 8 or 9 out of 10 consumers are confused enough about date labels that they're just tossing food into the trash at least some of the time. That's just an enormous waste that we've got to deal with. We need a rational date labeling system. That's what this legislation would do. It will save, in our estimation, 8 million pounds per year of food going into the trash. So we are proud at Natural Resources Defense Council to support this legislation, and we look forward to working with folks on both sides of the aisle to getting this enacted. Thank you.
Thank you. I am really proud that we have the support of organizations and companies like the ones represented here today, and I think we will have bipartisan support. We will have a lot of support across the country from organizations and individuals that are represented here today and others, and I, again, really want to thank Representative Pingree for her leadership, which has been so steadfast and vigorous in this area, and for being here today. Thanks for all you're doing in this cause, and we're happy to take any questions if there are any. Yep.
Hi, Penny Starr with CNS News. Representative Pingree, you mentioned that 50 million people struggling with hunger. Can you tell me where that comes from, where that data comes from? And how does this in any way regulate how these things will get to people in need? In other words, there's a part of it that actually directs food to those people.
Sure. Well, and we'll get you the citing of where we got our statistic, but that's a frequently quoted number. I'm sure Feeding America has probably even bigger numbers.
It's based on USDA does an annual food insecurity report. So it's on that.
All right.
And so your question about how, I mean, we make that connection, and obviously, just because you don't throw something in the trash doesn't mean it immediately gets into the hand of a food bank. But because there are 20 states right now that require food to be thrown away, even if it's an arbitrary label, as you can see, that causes liability issues for companies. Certainly, we hear that from grocers all the time. They're not sure about whether it's safe. We hear a lot of confusion from the people, as you were hearing, who receive the food, because some of them say, wait a minute, I got a jar of something and it's out of date, and now am I getting poisoned food even though it's free? And so I think it gets rid of a lot of confusion, and it certainly, this process is pretty well developed for the donation of food from retail stores and manufacturers and even individuals who are deciding, should I put that in the box that's going to go to my church food pantry, or am I supposed to throw it in the trash? So I think it's a pretty direct connection.
In Connecticut, there are food banks that receive donations, and often they are confused about what they can receive and what they can give away. But to answer your question very directly, the legislation doesn't regulate the donations. It simply, in effect, enables those donations and provides a standard so that everybody knows whether food is safe to eat after a certain date. And it thereby addresses some of the liability issues, although the real issues are not that people are getting sued. It's that people are confused and they're throwing away food unnecessarily that could go to folks who are insecure food-wise. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and we go forward.
There you go. Thank you very much. Hey, good work.
Thank you,